All right, today we're going to work with some more trinomials, but this time we're going to do some factoring. Now remember, factoring is like undistributing, so we've kind of like unpack it on figuring out what makes up this trinomial. You can write trinomials in the form of x squared plus bx plus c. So this is where what ends up happening once we distribute some terms together. Now, to understand, consider the product of the binomials. Okay, so we have our two binomials, and they've been FOILed out. So we have x times x, which is my x squared, and we have our, so remember FOIL, F-O-I-L, so our outside term is the x times 7, and I'm going to go all the way down here so we can see that. There's my x times my 7, and then my inside, which is 3 times the x, and the outside, which is 3 times the 7. But how we're looking at this differently is that my inside term is made up of the 3 and the 7 times the x. And we can see it here. It's the 3, actually 3 plus the 7. So bringing the two last terms in both the binomials together. It'll get easier as we get going here. It's almost easier to practice it and do it than to explain it. The coefficient of the trinomial is x squared. That term is the first term, term 1. The coefficient of the trinomial's x term is 10. This is some of the language of it. This 10 is the sum of the numbers 3 and 7 in the binomial, just like we talked. The trinomial's constant term is 21, and that is the product of the same numbers of 3 and 7. To factor a trinomial in the form x squared plus bx plus c as the product of binomials, you must first find the two numbers that have the sum of b and a and the product of c. Let me unpack that a little bit more. What they're saying in this situation is I need to figure out what two numbers are added together and get 8, okay, the sum, and those two numbers also, the product of those two numbers is 15. So what two numbers, what two factors of 15 that when I multiply them together I get 15, and when I add them together I get 8. So first of all, we need to consider the factors of 15. So the factors of 15 is 1 and 15, and 3 and 5. And then when I add those together, 1 and 15, I get 16. And when I add 3 and 5 together, I get 8. So this shows me a couple of things. That the factors of 15, so this makes up 15. So 3 times 5 gets me 15. 3 times 5. And then 3 plus 5 gets me my 8. So 3 plus 5 gets me my 8. And so I can see that it works in both cases. So that means that my, when I factor out this form here, I can see that it's x plus 3 times x plus 5. I want you to try it out. What is the factored form or the undistributed form of r squared plus 11r plus 24? So again, you're looking for what two factors when multiplied together get you 24, and those two same factors when added together give you 11. So when I look at the different factors of 24 that are going to make up the 24, I look through each one and then I consider all the sums of them, and I can see that 3 and 8 are 3 times 8 gets me my 24. 3 plus 8 gets me my 11. So when I factor out this trinomial, I know that 3 and 8 are my two terms. So I can do r plus 3 times r plus 8. Some factorable trinomials have a negative coefficient of x and a positive constant term. In this case, you need to inspect the negative factors of c to find the factors of the trinomial. So let's take a look at this guy. Now we're still doing the same thing. We're going to list the pair of negative factors of 24. So we're going to come back to our 24. So we can still, and we need to identify the pairs that end up with a negative 11. So I can still come back to this guy here and see my terms that my factors that give me to my 24. So, and here they all are again. But this time I have to consider the negatives. Okay, so the factors of 24 are negative 1 and 24. negative 2 and 12, negative 3 and negative 8, negative 4 and 6. When I add those together, I end up with negative 25, negative 14, negative 11, and 10. So again, I'm looking for one that when I multiply them together, I'm going to end up with a positive because my negative times a negative is going to get me to positive, but my negative plus a negative will, I'm looking for one that's going to keep me negative. And this is the one that does it. So my negative 3 times my negative 8 gets me to my 24. Negative 3 plus negative 8 gets me to my negative 11, which is what I'm looking for. And this tells me then that I'm working with x minus 3, x minus 8. Why don't you give it a try? Factored form of y squared minus 6y plus 8. Again, you're keeping an eye on this guy. So you see that that is negative there. So you know that the factors of 8 are going to both be negative. Because again, that is the product, that last term is the product of the factors. Press pause and give it a try. All right, factoring y squared minus 6y plus 8. When I look at the factors of 8, but they have to be negative, I can see that negative 2 and negative 4 are the only two that when multiplied together gets me to 8, and when added together gets me to negative 6. So that leaves me with y minus 2 times y minus 4. On the second part, can you factor x squared minus x plus 2? I tried it out by looking at 2, the products of 2, and again, because this is negative, they both the terms need to be negative, so the only option I have is negative 2 plus negative 1, which is going to get me to negative 3. So I can't get to that negative 1 in this situation. So no, these cannot be factored. When you factor trinomials with a negative constant term, you will need to inspect pairs of positive and negative factors. So we've tried it now where this is negative. So now we're going to take a look at the constant term and about that being negative. So we got to look at the factors of negative 15, which is going to give us a negative 15 result. So again, one of them will be positive, one of them will be negative. So 1 times negative 15, negative 1 and 15, 1 and 3 and negative 5, and negative 3 and 5. We need to consider each of those. The products of all these gets me to negative 15, which is what I want. Now let's consider the sums of these, because that's going to let us know which one to use, because I'm trying to get to 2. So 1 plus negative 15, negative 14. negative 1 plus 15 is 14. 3 plus negative 5 is negative 2. Negative 3 plus 5 is 2. So this is what we're looking for. This gets us to negative 3 times 5 gets me to my negative 15 that I'm looking for. Negative 3 plus 5 gets me to my 2. So I know that I'm working with x minus 3 times x plus 5. All right, why don't you give it a try using these two here. Press pause. All right, when I look at my different factors here, I can see that negative 3 times 12 is going to get me to my negative 36. Negative 3 plus 12 is going to get me to my 9, which is what I'm also looking for. B was a little interesting because both the terms ended up being negative here. So I knew that I needed to, in order to get a product of negative, I had one term negative and one factor negative, one factor positive. So I tried my 3 and my 7s, because that tells me those are 21. And when I add those together, I end up with a negative 4, which gives me here. So it's c minus 7 times c plus 3. Now we can go ahead and apply this. The area of a rectangle is given by that trinomial x squared minus 2x minus 35. What are the possible dimensions of the rectangle? We can use factoring to do this one. So I'm going to go ahead and factor this out. This is going to show us our dimension pieces. So my 35 is made up of, we can try, so I'm kind of looking ahead a little bit. I'm trying to see what's going to come up with giving me the 2. I can see that that could be a 5, and it could be a 7, And one of them's got to be negative, so I'm going to try a -5, and I'm going to try a -7. And I try adding those together. End up with 2. Try adding those together, and I get a -2. And I'm looking for a -2, so this is the one I'm looking for. So that tells me that -7 times 5 is -35. -7 plus 5 is -2, so this is what I'm looking for. So you can see it's x minus 7 times x plus 5. Let me stand back and make sure that I'm answering the question that's even being asked. And that is true. The dimensions, what am I looking for? What are the possible dimensions? And here they are. So x can be lots of different things. Why don't you go ahead and try it again? And you're going to end up using factoring to solve this one. Okay, possible dimensions of this are x minus 9 and x plus 8 when factoring out. Now notice I'm starting to not list all the entire factors. I'm starting to look ahead a little bit, trying to see, okay, knowing that something times something is going to get me 72, but when I add those together, I'm going to get x. So I knew the numbers had to be close together because they were only one away. You could also factor some trinomials that have more than one variable in them, but we need to pay attention to those variables. Okay, so like for instance, let's look at this number 5 here. Factoring a trinomial with 2 variables. Okay, list the pairs of factors of -55. Okay, so we're still doing that. Now I'm going to keep an eye on that 6. Right, so I've got, and this is a negative, so one of the terms has to be negative here, or one of the factors have to be negative. So I can do 11 and, well, -11 and 5. And that looks like, oh, that's 608, so I think this is good. And then I have -5 and 11. So let's consider these. That's going to be -6, and that's going to be 6. So that's good. This is the one we're interested in. Now we're looking for the one that has the sum of 6, and we found it. Now let's keep an eye on what's going on with this extra variable, the y term. So I know that I'm sitting with x minus 5 and x plus 11. But with that extra variable in there, I know that I have a y attached to the end here. And we can see how that is FOILed out. FOIL is f, okay, and then we can see the last term, which is, if I just look at the L in FOIL, the last term, -5y times 11y, I end up with -5 times 11, which is my 55, and y times y, which is my y squared. Why don't you give it a try? And notice that there is an extra variable here. We're talking with an n. So go ahead and press pause, and you try it. All right, this is how we end up. I noticed that the 3 and the 9 were my 2 good factors because just the 6 was communicating that to me. You want to start planning ahead. I just need to figure out which one was negative. And when I did find the sum of them, I could see that it was -3 and 9 that was going to be the numbers I was going to use. And when I built this out, and I knew that n was another term that was showing up here. There you go. All right, make sure you keep practicing. I'm going to go see if I can fit my head in a Kleenex box.